Hey everybody, it's Josh Runquist here for Heavy Debriefings, and it's time to finish out the last 5 parts of this series, starting it off with the top 10 albums of 2018. No dilly-dally, let's get into it. Coming in at number 10 is Morphle Congregation with the Incubus of Karma. And I can really go back to 2011's The King of Kings, where that could be my favorite Morphle Congregation album, but I think I do have to give the slight edge to the Incubus of Karma, because it just feels a little more right to me. Even though I love the fact that there's a 30-minute epic on that album, there is a 22-minute epic on here, which is the closing track. But also, at the same time, it just kind of feels more right to me. Everything feels a little more refined, everything feels a little bit more polished, especially in the production. Everything just feels right on this album if you enjoy that funeral doom metal with that death doom tinge to it. As of right now, this is the last Morphle Congregation album, or at least latest. They have just put out 2 new EPs, one last year and one last week as I'm recording this. And I still need to check out part 2, I haven't had the chance yet, but both of those EPs are basically album lengths, so are they technically albums? No, they call them EPs, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. But the Incubus of Karma, I can't wait to see what their next LP brings, if this is the direction that they're going in. Coming in at number 9 is Oceans of Slumber with The Banished Heart. And if you saw when I talked about Oceans of Slumber last, with their first major label album, Winter, you know that that was filled with a lot of great extreme progressive metal moments, which featured a lot of doom, a lot of near-death metal moments, a lot of extreme stuff going on here. With The Banished Heart, everything is much more refined. You don't see any crazy blast beat craziness going on. You see everything a bit more refined, everything's a little bit slower, everything's a bit more doomier, and it comes with good reason. Dauber Beverly, drummer, songwriter for the band Oceans of Slumber, was going through a divorce at this point, and he felt like his heart had shattered. And this is basically the soundtrack to all of that. Funny enough, he would eventually end up marrying singer Cammy from Oceans of Slumber, and they seem to have a magnificent relationship that all of us wishes we could have. Being able to write music with our loved one. That's pretty cool to me. But this is really where you could see the direction of where Oceans of Slumber was going. Wanted to focus more on the doom side, a little more on the prog side, get rid of the death elements to it. Has occasional guests on here. I mean, like Tom England is able to do a guest spot on the song No Color, No Lights, which his voice with Cammy is just magnificent. It just blends together so very well. And this is pretty much the direction that they would be going on until the next album, where it got even softer. And the latest album, Starlight and Ash, which came out last year, is the softest thing that they did. It's more of a southern gothic album, not even really a metal album. But again, like I mentioned when I talked about Winter, I feel like that was the direction they needed to go in. I actually like it when Oceans of Slumber gets lighter, and you might see them coming up soon. You might not. I still need to finalize the list. But until then, if you want something that's not as extreme as Winter was, check out The Banished Heart. Coming in at number 8 is Head with Wings with From Worry to Shame. And this is some fantastic progressive rock of more of that modern tinge. Not necessarily progressive metal, they're a little lighter than that, although they do get heavy in the right spots. But it's much more of a progressive rock affair, which I really think benefits the band. They deal with some heavy territory, especially lyrically, that goes into it. Of course, the song Somewhere Something Gives, I took from my own series, Something Gives with Josh Runquist, which you can still check out on this channel, which I had to abandon when too many bad things were going on at once and I just could not keep up with it mentally, if you just want an idea of what the show was about. But I always have a love for this album. It helped me through a pretty dark time in my life. And of course, my life is just filled with a lot of dark moments that keep going on, but anytime that I put on this album, it really does just make me feel better. It's a very cathartic album, and I can't wait to see what their next LP entails. They did release an EP a few years ago, but I'm waiting on that sophomore album. Bring it on. Coming in at number 7 is Light the Torch with Revival. Depending on how you look at it, this is either the first album from the band, or it's the third album if you include the incarnation of the original band, Devil You Know. But there is a huge change that did happen within most of the members of this band between Devil You Know and Light the Torch. They decided to go into a more commercial sound than Devil You Know, which was much harder and much heavier. With Light the Torch, Howard Jones, formerly of Killswitch Engage, now with a new project with Adam D, which is not officially out there, but it's out there, isn't really doing screams or growls on this album, which he is so good at. But this band doesn't really call for it. It's almost predominantly clean vocals. And on the next album, I don't even think if he does a single scream or growl, it's all clean vocals. Which I think is amazing because he has such a fantastic voice. Of course, the music is very radio friendly for the most part. It does get a little heavier than you would hear on Top 40 radio, but again, that's not a bad thing. I think that the music that they're trying to make really fits what they want to accomplish. This is the music they want to make, and they're doing a damn fine job of it. And yeah, this won't be the last time you see Light the Torch on this series either. Coming in at number 6 is the penultimate album from Magic Dance, New Eyes. I really wanted to put the previous album Vanishings on here as well, but unfortunately it just did not make the cut. But with New Eyes, I'm so glad it did make the cut because I do love this album. Vanishings is the heavier album, and they ended strong with some really heavy material before they became the Runaway Wild. That will be a conversation for a different day, but with Magic Dance, this was the first album where the band was a band. It wasn't just the songwriter making the album, it was an entire band working on these ideas together, and I loved what they were able to accomplish because they really hit that 80s but modern feel behind it. It's a great throwback to stuff that you would hear from the 80s. I mean, anything from like Hall & Oates to Van Halen to Autograph, you would be able to hear on this album, but they still make it their own and it sounds modern with that throwback feel. Not a lot of bands can do that, but they definitely did. This is probably the most varied album the band ever did, and I think I love it the most because of that. I love the variation behind it. It shows great range that you can write a pop rock song, a near metal song, and everything in between. And if you've never checked out Magic Dance, you might want to give it a shot yourself. It's a great throwback that you just might enjoy. Coming in at number 5 is my favorite album from Omnium Gatherum, The Burning Cold. While I have said, and I will continue to say, they are my favorite melodeath band, they don't always appear in this series, which is unfortunate, but consistently they have my favorite melodic death metal albums consistently. I'm glad I was able to throw in one album prior to this, and unfortunately this is going to be the last time you see them in this series, but I'm so happy with the material that they were able to put out. This album in particular hits everything that I love about the band, but adds just a little bit of an 80s tinge to it, where it has a little bit of that throwback heavy metal feel behind it, a little bit more synthwave, and just a really cool 80s aesthetic on top of melodic death metal, which not a lot of bands have experimented with, but they should. This album is just pure perfection, and of course, some of that has to go to the mixing and mastering done by Dan Swano. I'm always going to fanboy over that. But the album production, it just sounds incredible. The songwriting is pristine. I love everything about this album, and if you want to hear my favorite melodic death metal album of all time, all you need to do is check this album out. Coming in at number 4 is the self-titled album from Zealand Ardor. The sophomore album takes that original idea that started the band, African American spirituals and black metal mixed together. With the original album Devil Is Fine, it is the idea of what if African American slaves during the Civil War was praising Satan instead of God, and it just made for a very dark, very evil horror soundtrack that I still feel Jordan Peele needs to make a movie about. I want those two to form together to create the ultimate horror movie based on this. With the self-titled, it takes that idea, but it does so many things more with it. First of all, massive production value. This one sounds so much better than Devil Is Fine, where that has more of a raw, evil, creepy feel behind it. This one is more clear and pristine, but that almost makes it more evil because you can hear everything that's going on. It still takes a lot of those same ideas that you hear about the band, and this is the last time they kind of really focus on it because the world kind of changed after this album came out. But I really love everything that they were able to accomplish here, be it the instrumentals, be it the spoken word parts, or just the flat out songs that they were able to accomplish. The song Ashes, which closes out the album, is my favorite overall Zealand Ardor song. Might not be for everyone, but I love the feel behind it. And yeah, if you want that idea of African American spirituals, black metal, neo-soul, kind of a little bit of a rap hip-hop feel sometimes in the beats, although that would come a little bit more later. And of course, as I said, black metal. You need to check this album out. You're not expecting what to hear, especially if you haven't heard this before, but you just might like what you hear. This one will be very hard for me to talk about, so please brace yourself. At number 3, it is Witherfall with A Prelude to Sorrow. Originally, this was my favorite album of 2018, and I still hold it in very, very high regard, but I will say it is very, very hard for me to go back to. Mainly, well, entirely due to the fact that it is an album about the original drummer of the band, Adam Sagan, who unfortunately passed due to lymphoma. And this album pretty much details the beginning of his struggle with lymphoma all the way to the end. Some of it's done through metaphor, some of it hits you right over the head with what it's talking about, but it is a very sad but cathartic album. Adam was a huge inspiration to me, one of my best friends in the business of music, and one of the few people in the world that loved everything that I did and wanted nothing more than to see me succeed. He loved everything that I did, and I still wouldn't be doing what I do now, which is pretty much just relegated to YouTube and the website now, but I wouldn't be doing this without Adam. I miss him so very, very much. If you're looking for what the style of music is about, imagine a band like Sanctuary and Nevermore, some really heavy progressive metal, some really heavy power metal mixed together, like the perfect band to play Prog Power USA, which, wouldn't you know, they have done that. I know Adam would have loved to have been a part of that, but fortunately life doesn't go our way. But I kind of fell off of Witherfall after this album for various reasons, but I still hold this album and the album that Adam got to play on, the debut album, in such high regard. And if you want an emotional roller coaster of sorrow, no pun intended, well, kind of pun intended, check out this album, A Prelude to Sorrow. If you love that progressive power metal sound, I can't imagine you'd be disappointed. Coming in at number 2 is Reference of Nile with Where Owls Know My Name. Their best album of the 4 so far. I love everything about this album. It's the most proggy album that they put out. It's the most emotional album that they've put out. There's a lot of arguments for the work, which I totally understand. And there's arguments for the previous 2 albums, which are much more in that tech death world, which, again, if you're of that style, I totally understand. But for me, and what I love about this style of music, everything hits home with this album. The dark lyrical overtones, the songwriting, the guest musicians who are a part of this, the saxophone. Yes, I know that is a watershed moment in the band when they started incorporating saxophone, because now it kind of feels like a main part of the band with this album and a little bit more on the work. Will they formally integrate the saxophone in? We'll have to see. I think they should. But with Rivers of Nile, like, they are one of those bands that just broke through with this album. And I'm so glad to see that love and respect, because they totally deserve it on this album. Everything that they've done. I mean, there's a reason why it's still held in such good regard 5 years later. It's just that good. It withheld the test of time. And I can't wait to see what they do next. I mean, there's been some lineup changes, some good, some bad. Obviously, that happens anytime with the band, and now that this whole 4-story arc between all 4 albums of the seasons is done, what are they going to do next? I can't wait to see. And at number 1, my favorite album of 2018 is Panopticon, with their double disc album, The Scars of Man on the Once Nameless Wilderness 1 and 2. The first disc is pure Panopticon for what they've always been known for, that great atmospheric black metal, black gaze sound. And you'll notice throughout these ones that you don't really hear more of the North American folk metal, as I like to call it, throughout these songs. There's a little bit of it, but it's much more focused on the black metal side of them, something that they wouldn't really hint at again, although who's to say what's going to happen in the future. Whereas Disc 2 takes all of those ideas that would normally be a part of Panopticon's sound and separates it. Disc 2 is actually something I've grown to love much more than Disc 1. It has a great Americana, bluegrass, country feel behind it, some post-rock elements in a couple songs, and above all, kind of just like a southern country kind of feel behind it, which, if you know about Panopticon, is not a shock to you, but if you've never checked out the band before, it will be a bit of a culture shock for you. But in this sense, especially with what he's singing about, very leftist stuff, which is sure to piss off a lot of country artists, a lot of ideas that really hit home. You know, sometimes it's ghost stories, sometimes it's about what we're doing to the earth, everything in between. Yes, this is a very leftist album, but Panopticon is a very leftist band, which I very much appreciate. And if you want an introduction into black gaze, I think Disc 1 is a fantastic start for you. But if you want to see a more modern take on what a black metal musician is capable of in doing a different style, not normally known outside of something like Panopticon, but you know, doing that post-rock, Americana, country, acoustic, bluegrass kind of feel, you really should give both discs a shot. And if you go onto Spotify, there's a third disc where all of the songs off disc 2 are acoustified. A couple of them are live, but they're all the acoustic demo versions, basically, of all these songs, and they might even be better than disc 2. So give all 3 discs a shot. And there you go, folks, my top 10 albums of 2018. What do you think? Do you like the list? Do you not like the list? What did I leave out? Or do you just want to give me crap for my own personal humble opinion? Let me know down below. And of course, like, comment, share, subscribe, all of that stuff. I've been slowly gaining a lot of attention this year, but slowly is the key word there. I would love to see a lot more momentum going on here, so anything you can do to help the channel will be greatly appreciated. And until the top 10 albums of 2019, another top 10 list that I do, next band review, band interview, or anything else that I do here on the Heavy Debriefings YouTube channel. For Heavy Debriefings, this is Josh Rehnquist saying, see ya.